Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at something you probably do multiple times a day, maybe even right now, yawning. It seems so simple, right?
Totally.
But get this, it actually opens this kind of window into how our brains work and, well, our social connections too.
Yeah, it's surprisingly deep.
So our mission today is really to explore why we yawn and what this, reflex tells us about ourselves and how we relate to each other.
And just to kind of hook you right away, think about this. Even just seeing a yawn, maybe scrolling on your phone, you see a GIF
Right.
that can trigger activity in your brain just as if you were yawning yourself.
Wow.
It's down to something called mirror neurons. That's a key piece we'll be unpacking.
Exactly. And we've gathered quite a bit of research for this deep dive, neuroscience, social stuff, even evolutionary roots, all to bring you a hopefully much deeper understanding of this everyday thing.
Yeah, it should be fun.
So let's get started. Okay, let's unpack this. What's actually going on up there in our brains when a yawn happens? Ours or someone else's?
Well, what's really interesting is how directly our brains react when we see someone else yawn.
Okay.
Neuroimaging studies, brain scans, they've pinpointed this specific area, the right inferior frontal gyrus.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. But it's basically a hub for those mirror neurons we just mentioned. That area gets particularly active. And it's not just that spot. Other brain networks involved in empathy, they also sort of light up.
So these mirror neurons, it's almost like my brain sees you yawn and goes, oh, right, yawning. Let me just run a quick simulation of that feeling.
You're a great way to put it. Yeah. They let your brain internally simulate the action it sees. So seeing a yawn isn't just like passive data. Your brain is actively mimicking it, which is what gives you that urge to yawn yourself.
Wild.
And it's not just sight. Research shows even hearing someone yawn.
No way.
Or even just reading the word yawn. Seriously. Just reading the word.
Yeah, it can trigger this involuntary response.
That's almost unbelievable. That the idea of it can make you do it. So it's not conscious at all. Not like, maybe I should yawn now.
Not at all. It's totally automatic. That automaticity is like a defining feature of contagious yawning.
Okay.
And, well, connecting this back to the brain, studies also show seeing yawn activates the ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
Okay, another brain bit. What does that one do?
That's more of a higher level area. It's involved in processing social cues and, importantly, empathy.
Empathy again.
Exactly. So it's not just about copying a physical movement. There's a social-emotional component baked in.
Okay, so we're seeing the brain mechanics. But how does this play out in, our actual lives or interactions? This brings us to that empathy link, right?
Yeah, and this is where it gets, I think, really fascinating because lots of research pretty consistently shows that yawn contagion isn't random.
Okay.
It actually tracks how emotionally close we are to people.
Really? How so? Well, for example, you're way more likely to catch a yawn from, say, your brother or your best friend than from a complete stranger.
That kind of feels right. Intuitively, you're just more tuned in to people you know well.
Yeah.
But is there, solid proof?
Oh, absolutely. There was this big year-long observational study. They looked at people across different continents,
Wow.
and they found the single biggest predictor of catching a yawn was the social bond.
The bond.
Yep. Yawns spread most easily within families, then among friends, and much, much less between acquaintances or strangers.
So it's not just who's in the room, it's about the actual connection.
Exactly right. And if you think about it, that pattern perfectly mirrors how empathy generally works, doesn't it? We tend to feel more for those we're closest to.
Yeah, makes sense.
And there's another interesting piece, how it develops in kids. Contagious yawning usually kicks in around age 4 or 5,
Okay.
which is, interestingly, right around the time kids start developing a better understanding of other people's feelings.
Yeah.
Theory of mind, empathy.
That's a really neat parallel. So what about people who might have difficulties with empathy, like certain conditions?
That's a really important point. And yes, studies have looked at this. They found that people with conditions sometimes linked to differences in empathy, like autism spectrum disorder, they tend to show weaker or less frequent contagious yawning.
Which supports the link again.
It really does. So what's the takeaway here? It strongly suggests yawning, especially the contagious kind, is more than just physiology. It could be this unconscious signal Like an "I feel
With
you."
nonverbal nod.
Exactly. A subtle way to kind of acknowledge and maybe even sync up our internal states with people around us, like synchronizing the tribe behaviorally and
Oh,
physiologically.
wow, like a silent, yeah, I'm on your wavelength, even if it's a sleepy wavelength.
Pretty much.
So this makes you wonder about the origins, right?
Yeah.
Why did we even start yawning, and how did it morph into this catchy social thing? Let's look at the evolution side.
Right. So the basic yawn itself, just that big, deep inhale, mouth wide open,
Yeah.
that's actually ancient. A really old reflex. We see it all over the place in vertebrates. Fish, reptiles, mammals, they all do it.
Even fish yawn.
Apparently so. But the contagious part, the social thing, that seems to have evolved much later. It's more of a social tool built on top of the basic reflex.
Okay, so why the basic reflex then? Any ideas?
Well, physiologically, one of the main theories floating around is the brain cooling hypothesis.
Brain cooling, like our yawns are little air conditioners for our heads.
Ah, that's basically the idea, yeah. The theory is that yawning boosts blood flow to the brain and maybe pulls in cooler air from outside,
Hmm.
which helps regulate brain temperature, keep it from overheating, essentially.
Is there evidence for that?
There is some interesting correlational evidence. Research has found people tend to yawn more often when the outside temperature is sort of moderate.
Not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. The idea being maybe you don't need to cool down as much if it's already cold, and maybe yawning isn't as effective if it's super hot outside.
Okay, that's plausible. So if the original point was maybe temperature control, how did it get hijacked for social purposes?
Well, the thinking is that this basic physiological reflex got, co-opted over evolutionary time. It took on a social function.
Right.
One really compelling idea comes from Andrew Gallup. He calls it the social alarm
A
hypothesis.
social alarm. What did that mean?
He suggests that seeing someone yawn in a group could act as a subtle signal of maybe drowsiness or reduced alertness.
Ah, like a quiet, hey folks, I'm getting a bit tired here. Maybe let's all stay sharp.
Precisely. So one person might yawn spontaneously because, their brain needs cooling or they're tired.
Hmm.
But then the yawns that spread through the group, the contagious ones, might actually boost the whole WERP's alertness and synchrony, keep everyone on the same page behaviorally, physiologically.
So it starts internal, then becomes external, then maybe internal again for the group.
Kind of, yeah. It seems like it began as maybe a physiological thing and then
Yeah.
gradually picked up these important social roles.
Any examples of that synchrony?
Well, there are some interesting historical accounts. Someone back in the 19th century described watching an Amazonian tribe where one person yawned
Yeah.
and it set off this chain reaction, and then the whole group just got up and left together, perfectly synchronized.
Just from a yawn. That's incredible. Paints a real picture. So, okay, this isn't just a modern human thing, clearly. What about across different cultures?
Yeah.
And you mentioned other animals earlier.
Right. Well, first, in humans, it's remarkably universal. People describe it as immediately recognizable everywhere.
Makes sense.
And studies across, I think it was 5 continents, found basically no difference in how contagious yawns are based on your nationality or where you are. City, country, doesn't matter.
A yawn is a yawn.
Pretty much. And it doesn't need face-to-face contact either. Yawns are weirdly viral, even through screens.
Like TD or Zoom.
Exactly. TV, video calls, even just reading about yawning, as we said, or seeing those yawning GIFs online.
So those gifts aren't just silly internet stuff. They're actually tapping into deep biology.
They really are. And it goes way beyond humans. We mentioned dogs earlier.
Right, catching yawns from people.
Yeah. One study specifically showed dogs yawned more after seeing a human yawn compared to just seeing a neutral mouth movement, which suggests some basic empathy-like response.
That's so cool. My dog definitely seems to pick up on my mood.
Well, there might be something to that. And it's not just dogs. Contagious yawning happens in other very social animals too, like bonobos,
Okay, primates.
engelada baboons, and again, it's strongest between individuals with close bonds. For the geladas, they actually found a direct link between how much they groomed each other, a sign of social closeness, and how likely they were to catch each other's yawns.
Grooming and yawning linked.
Yeah. And maybe the most surprising one?
Budgies.
Budgergars, little parakeets.
Yep. Studies found evidence they can catch yawns from each other, at least in lab settings.
Wow. What about cats? My cat yawns constantly, but does she catch mine? Seems unlikely. That's a good question. The research on cats is less clear, less available. Most studies focus on primates, dogs, some birds,
Okay.
but cats definitely on. The contagious part. Jury's still out, maybe. But the bigger picture is that yawning itself is super widespread across the animal kingdom. And in social species, it often gets this contagious, socially meaningful layer.
Okay, so let's try and pull all this together. We've gone through neuroscience, empathy, evolution, animals. What are the really key takeaways from this whole deep dive? What's the essence?
I think the core idea really is that a yawn acts like a kind of emotional contagion, but it's cleverly disguised as just a simple reflex.
Emotional contagion.
Yeah, that brain mirroring thing we talked about, that makes
Okay.
them incredibly easy to pass around.
Right, the mirror neurons.
So you can almost think of it as a subtle, like, social signal, maybe even an unconscious social like button. It's a low-key way our bodies express a connection and empathy, especially with people we're close to.
So catching a yawn from a loved one is like your body saying, yep, feeling that too.
Kind of. An unconscious, I'm with you. And like we said, even a GIF or a meme online can trigger this deep response. It's tapping into something real.
And the animal connection.
That just broadens the picture, doesn't it? Seeing it in dogs, monkeys, even budgies.
Yeah.
It hints that this basic capacity for maybe empathy or social resonance is more widespread than we might think.
Hmm.
It's fascinating, too, that even historically, people seem to get that yawning wasn't just about being tired. They called it a pleasant reflex sometimes, but noticed how it could ripple through a group.
Connecting people.
Exactly. Maybe this tiny reflex is actually a fundamental part of how we and other social animals subtly align with each other without even thinking about it.
So the next time you feel that urge to yawn after seeing someone else do it, maybe even someone on a screen, just remember all that fascinating stuff going on. The neurons firing, the social history.
Yeah.
It's definitely more than just being sleepy. It's like a little peek into our shared biology and our capacity for connection.
Absolutely. And, thinking about how deep this contagious yawning thing goes and how tied it is to social bonds, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
Well, what other automatic behaviors, things we do without thinking, might have these hidden layers, these hidden meanings about connection? What other kinds of viral social cues might be shaping our interactions every day, completely under the radar?